The courtroom was her final battlefield. Elena Petrov had already lost her husband, her home, and her millions. Now they were about to take her daughter. As her husband's mistress smirked from the witness stand, Elena's body gave out and she collapsed. The mistress smiled, thinking she had won. She didn't know the judge was looking at a file just handed to her. She didn't know the judge was about to look up and say 4 words that would change everything. You're under arrest. This isn't just a story of divorce. It's a story of a lie so perfect it fooled everyone, except the one person who had nothing left to lose. The silence of courtroom 3B was a physical weight pressing down on Elena Petrov. It was a sterile, suffocating silence, smelling faintly of old paper floor wax and the metallic tang of human anxiety. For 6 months, this room had been her personal hell. Today was the end. Elena sat bolt upright at the defendant's table, though in this case it was the respondent's table. In a high-stakes divorce, she felt every bit the criminal she was being painted as. Her knuckles were white, gripping the polished oak edge. She hadn't eaten in 36 hours, subsisting on stale coffee, and a primal fear that had hollowed out her stomach. She was a ghost, haunting her own life. Her suit, a charcoal gray wool that once felt powerful, now hung loosely on her depleted frame. Her blonde hair, which Matthew used to say captured the light, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that did nothing to hide the dark, bruised circles under her eyes. Across the aisle, they sat. Her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Matthew Petrov, and his associate. Matthew was the picture of corporate success. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford dark navy, projecting stability and control. He stared straight ahead, his profile like a Roman coin, handsome and utterly cold. He hadn't made eye contact with Elena in 82 days, she had counted. Beside him, closer than his own lawyer, was Serafina Hayes. Serafina was everything Elena was not. She was vibrant, her dark hair a glossy curtain, her makeup impeccable. She wore a deep crimson dress that was just professional enough for court, but suggestive enough to stake her claim. She was the chief restructuring officer of Petrov Innovations, the company Elena and Matthew had built from their college dorm room. And she was, of course, the mistress. But Serafina was no mere homewrecker. She was the architect of this entire nightmare. Elena's lawyer, Dylan Finch, leaned in his voice a low, urgent whisper. He was young, hungry, and in way over his head, but he was the only lawyer who had believed her enough to take the case on contingency. Elena Judge Warren is about to reconvene, he whispered. Their lawyer Sullivan is going for the final motion. He's going to bring up the psych eval. Whatever happens, whatever he says, you cannot react. Do you understand me? Don't look at them. Look at me or look at the judge. Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The psych eval. The weapon they had crafted to paint her as an unstable, paranoid, unfit mother. The key to taking her 8-year-old daughter, Laura. All rise, the bailiff intoned, his voice booming in the cavernous room. Judge Amelia Warren entered, her black robes sweeping behind her. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a reputation for suffering no fools and possessing a mind like a steel trap. She settled into her high-backed chair, her eyes scanning the room over her reading glasses. Mr. Sullivan, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. You may proceed with your closing motion. Richard Rick Sullivan. Matthew's lawyer stood up. He was a shark in a $5,000 suit, all teeth and polished confidence. Thank you, Your Honor, he boomed. We have endured 6 months of theatrics from the respondent. We have heard wild accusations of financial misconduct, embezzlement, and conspiracy, all without a single shred of evidence. What we have seen, however, is a clear and tragic pattern of emotional instability from Ms. Petrov. He gestured to Elena. A woman who, consumed by jealousy, has attempted to burn down the very company that provided her with a life of luxury, a woman who, by her own admission, has been overwhelmed and unable to cope. Dylan Finch shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Sullivan is mischaracterizing my client's testimony. It's argument, Mr. Finch. He's allowed some latitude. Sit down. Judge Warren said, not unkindly but firmly. Sullivan smiled. The facts are simple. Mr. Petrov, with the help of the brilliant Ms. Hayes, saved Petrov Innovations from financial ruin caused by Ms. Petrov's reckless and emotional mismanagement. He paused, picking up a bound document from his table. But this is no longer just about money, Your Honor. This is about the welfare of a child. We submit this the psychological evaluation of Dr. Alistair Finch, no relation to counsel, he added with a smirk, which concludes that Elena Petrov is currently suffering from, and I quote, paranoid personality disorder and severe emotional lability posing a potential risk to the well-being of her minor child. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Liar. Liar. She could feel the blood drain from her face. Therefore, Sullivan concluded, his voice resonating with false sympathy, we move that the court grant Mr. Petrov's petition, award him full and sole custody of Laura Petrov, and terminate Ms. Petrov's parental rights for the safety of the child. A low gasp escaped Elena's lips. Terminate. They weren't just asking for custody. They were trying to erase her. She looked across the aisle. Matthew was still staring at the judge. But Serafina turned her head and looked directly at Elena. And she smiled. It was not a triumphant smirk. It was a smile of pity, of condescension. It was the smile of a victor so assured of her win that she could afford to feel sorry for the loser. It was the smile that said, "You are nothing. You are done." That smile broke something inside Elena. The floor seemed to drop away. The room tilted, the fluorescent lights blurring into bright, painful streaks. The judge's face swam. Elena, Dylan Finch's voice sounded very far away. That's... Elena tried to stand. That's a lie. But the air was too thick. Her lungs wouldn't inflate. A black, crushing static filled her ears. She saw Dylan's panicked face as she pitched forward, her hand sliding off the table. Then silence. And darkness. Elena Petrov had fainted in court. It hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, Petrov Innovations was just Elena and Matthew in a cramped apartment coding until 3 a.m., fueled by cheap pizza and a shared dream. Elena was the architect. Matthew was the salesman. She designed the revolutionary logistics algorithm, the Vanguard system, that could predict supply chain disruptions with 98% accuracy. He was the charismatic visionary who sold it to the world. They were a perfect team. He was the thunder. She was the lightning. Their marriage was a partnership built on late-night brainstorming sessions and a deep, abiding trust. When Laura was born, it felt like the final perfect piece. Elena had stepped back from full-time coding to raise Laura, but she never stepped away from the company. She sat on the board. She was the chief strategist, the one Matthew came to at midnight, tie undone, whispering, "Okay, Lena, I have a crazy idea, Talk me through it." The gilded cage was built so slowly she didn't even notice the bars. It started about 18 months ago. Matthew had just secured a massive Series C funding round valuing the company at $2 billion. He was on magazine covers. He was the Oracle of Austin. "We need to professionalize Lena," he told her over dinner at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. "We're playing in the big leagues. I need a COO, a real heavy hitter to optimize operations." He hired Serafina Hayes. She came with a glowing resume from a top-tier consulting firm in New York. She was brilliant, ruthless, and spoke the language of optimization and synergy that had begun to replace the language of dreams in Matthew's vocabulary. At first, Elena was relieved. Serafina handled the logistics, freeing Elena to focus on Laura and new R&D. But Serafina's optimizations began to feel like isolations. First, Serafina migrated the company's financial servers to a new, more secure platform. Elena's board-level access credentials glitched. "Sorry, Elena," Serafina had said, her voice dripping with professional courtesy. "It's a new encryption. We'll get you a new login sorted out. The IT guys are just swamped." The new login never came. Then the board meetings were rescheduled. "A conflict with the new investors, Elena. Just a quick sync-up. We'll send you the minutes," Matthew would say, already halfway out the door. The minutes became vague, sanitized summaries. Elena, busy with Laura's school play and a new charity project, let it slide. She trusted her husband. The thought that he would intentionally lock her out of her own life was so monstrous her mind simply refused to entertain it. The betrayal, when it came, was not a quiet discovery. It was an explosion. Elena had been planning a surprise 40th birthday trip for Matthew to Tuscany. She used their household credit card, the one they'd had for 15 years, to book the villa. Declined. She frowned. She tried again. Declined. She called the bank. A polite, nervous young man put her on hold for 10 minutes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Petrov," he finally stammered. "This account was closed, 3 months ago. The primary account holder, Mr. Petrov, consolidated the funds." "Consolidated into what?" I can't disclose that, ma'am. You're no longer listed as an authorized user on any of Mr. Petrov's accounts." The cold dread started then. She drove to the office, a sleek glass tower in downtown Austin. Her keycard, which used to open the executive elevator, beeped red. Access denied. She had to go to the front desk like a visitor. "Elena Petrov, to see Matthew Petrov." The receptionist, a young woman who Elena herself had hired, looked up with deep-set pity. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Petrov. Mr. Petrov is in a meeting. Ms. Hayes is his new executive assistant and manages all his scheduling. Shall I see if she's free?" Serafina. Elena didn't wait. She pushed past the security turnstile, triggering an alarm, and stormed into the executive elevator, jamming her old code in. Miraculously, it worked. The doors opened onto the 40th floor. The plush gray carpet, the modern art she had picked out, it all seemed alien. Serafina's new corner office, which used to be the R&D lounge, was right next to Matthew's. And through the frosted glass wall of Matthew's office, she saw them. They weren't kissing. It was almost worse. Serafina was standing behind Matthew, who was seated at his desk. Her hands were on his shoulders, massaging them, as she leaned in her chin, hooked over his shoulder, her crimson-nailed finger pointing at something on his monitor. They were a unit. Intimate, connected, a closed circle. Elena stumbled back. The sound must have alerted them. The door opened. Matthew looked out, his face annoyed, not guilty. "Elena, What are you doing? You set off the alarm. My card didn't work, she whispered the words, sounding stupid. The bank. They said my accounts are closed. Matthew sighed, a put-upon sound she had come to dread. Elena, this isn't the time. We're in the middle of a major deal. Who is she? Elena asked, looking past him at Serafina, who was now standing arms crossed, the picture of calm authority. She's my COO, Elena, as you perfectly well know, Matthew said, stepping into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind him. And you're... Elena couldn't say the word. Matthew's face hardened. The annoyed husband was gone, replaced by the CEO. Serafina has been instrumental in protecting this company from your emotional, impulsive decisions. The spending was out of control. Lena, the charity project, the Tuscany trip, we are trying to run a business. My spending. It's our money, Matthew. My algorithm. The algorithm, he said, and this was the killing blow, was a college project. The company is a multi-billion-dollar entity that I and now Serafina manage. You are a board member. You are not a manager. I am your wife. His eyes were flat. Dead. The lawyers will be in touch, Elena. They'll be serving you at the house. I think it's best if you stay at the Four Seasons for a few days. You're divorcing me. I'm protecting the assets, he said. And Laura, she choked out. Laura will stay with me. The house is a stable environment. You're clearly overwrought. He turned and went back into his office, the door clicking shut with terrifying finality. That was 6 months ago. Since then, it had been a systematic demolition. The house was a marital asset, but Matthew's lawyers argued it was also collateral for a business loan, and it was seized. Elena was forced into a small rental apartment. They produced evidence of her mismanagement, the charity donation which Matthew had co-signed, the cancelled Tuscany trip, her extravagant spending at the grocery store. It was all twisted, reframed. Simultaneously, Serafina published a glowing article in Forbes, How Petrov Innovations was saved by strategic restructuring, positioning herself as the company's savior and implicitly Elena as the liability. Elena was left with nothing but a young contingency fee lawyer and a deep, burning conviction that she was being robbed. But the worst was the psych eval. Matthew's team had motioned for it, citing her erratic behavior, storming the office, and delusions, claiming Serafina was stealing from her. The court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Alistair Finch, had a 20-minute session with her. His report was a work of fiction full of diagnostic buzzwords: paranoid, unstable, lability. Elena knew with a sickening certainty that he had been paid. But she couldn't prove it, and now lying on a cold tile floor in an anteroom off the court, with a paramedic shining a light in her eyes, Elena knew she had lost. The faint was the final nail in her coffin. It was the proof they needed. She was the unstable woman they claimed she was. She had lost. Serafina had won. To understand the victory, you had to understand Serafina's performance. It had happened 2 days before the feint, and it was the masterpiece that had sealed Elena's fate. Serafina Hayes took the witness stand like an actress taking the stage. She was sworn in her voice, clear and calm. She wore a modest, high-necked navy blouse. She was the image of professional competence. Richard Sullivan. Matthew's lawyer handled her direct examination with a gentle, paternal tone. Ms. Hayes, could you please describe for the court the state of Petrov Innovations when you were brought on as COO? Serafina clasped her hands in her lap. It was chaotic, she said, her voice tinged with professional regret. Mr. Petrov is a creative genius, But the company's back end was a shambles. There was no accountability, no clear P&L tracking. Spending was emotional, not strategic. Emotional spending. Can you give us an example? Certainly. Ms. Petrov, in her capacity as a board member, initiated a $5 million donation to a new unvetted children's art charity. A wonderful gesture, of course. She smiled warmly. But it was unbudgeted and nearly triggered a default on one of our covenants with our investors. It was impulsive. Dylan Finch jumped up. Objection. My client has testified that Mr. Petrov co-signed that donation, and Ms. Hayes is testifying to the financial context, Judge Warren countered. Continue, Ms. Hayes. Thank you, Your Honor. Serafina turned to the judge, a picture of earnest honesty. My job was to stop the bleeding. I had to make hard decisions. This unfortunately created friction with Ms. Petrov, who was used to, well, operating without oversight. Sullivan paced. Ms. Hayes, you've heard the allegations Ms. Petrov has made, that you sidelined her, that you locked her out of the company financials. How do you respond to that? Serafina looked genuinely hurt. It breaks my heart, truly, she said, her voice dropping. I deeply admire Elena. She's the mother of Matthew's child. But she was struggling. When we migrated to the new secure server, a non-negotiable requirement from our new investors, she seemed to view it as a personal attack. She refused to complete the security protocols. She would forget her passwords, then accuse the IT department of gaslighting her. Elena, sitting at her table, felt a hot rush of rage. Lies. You never sent the protocols. And what about your personal relationship with Mr. Petrov? Sullivan asked, his tone shifting to one of a concerned friend. Serafina blushed, just slightly. It was a perfect performance. Mr. Petrov and I developed a deep respect for one another. We were in the trenches together trying to save this company. He was in a very difficult position. His marriage was, well, he felt very unsupported. He felt emotionally abandoned. And your relationship became romantic. Yes, she said, her voice small. After he had formally separated from Ms. Petrov and moved out of the marital home. Not before. Another lie. A clean, simple, devastating lie. We fell in love, Serafina said, daring to look at Matthew with a soft, supportive gaze. I love him, and I love Laura like my own. All I have ever wanted is to protect them both. First the company, and now the family. She had done it. In 20 minutes, she had recast the entire narrative. She wasn't a mistress. She was a savior. She wasn't a thief. She was a financial steward. Elena wasn't a victim. She was a bitter, unstable ex-wife. It was Dylan Finch's turn for cross-examination. He was good, but he was outgunned. He was trying to fight a tank with a slingshot. Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that within 6 weeks of your hiring you had drafted documents to create 3 new offshore shell corporations in the Cayman Islands? Dylan asked, his voice sharp. Yes, that's correct, Serafina answered smoothly. For tax optimization and to hold international intellectual property rights. It's standard Finance 101 for a multinational corporation. And isn't it true that you are the sole signatory on those accounts? As the Chief Restructuring Officer, yes, that's my fiduciary duty. All accounts are of course fully audited and transparent to Mr. Petrov and our board. But not transparent to Ms. Petrov, another board member. As I testified, Serafina said, her tone patient, as if speaking to a child, Ms. Petrov had unfortunately not completed the security protocols to access the new portal. It's a tragedy of timing. Dylan paced, frustrated. He knew she was lying. He just couldn't prove it. Ms. Hayes, he said, shifting tactics. What exactly is your background? Your resume states you were at HS Capital in New York from 2015 to 2020. We can find no record of this firm. Sullivan was on his feet. Objection. Badgering counsel is on a fishing expedition. I'll allow it, Judge Warren said, leaning forward slightly. Answer the question, Ms. Hayes. Serafina didn't blink. HS Capital was a private family fund, Your Honor. It was not publicly registered. We managed the assets of the Van Kriegen estate. After Mr. Van Kriegen passed, the fund was dissolved. It's all perfectly standard. She had an answer for everything. Every door Dylan tried to open, Serafina had already locked and barricaded. He pressed on for another hour, trying to poke holes in her story about the server migration, about the wire transfers she'd authorized, about the timeline of her affair with Matthew. But she was flawless. She was a fortress of polished, reasonable corporate-speak lies. When she finally stepped down, Elena felt the case collapse. Serafina had inoculated herself. She had presented a narrative so compelling and so tight that Elena's own story now seemed, even to Elena herself, like the ravings of a paranoid woman. That night, Elena's visitation with Laura was supervised. A grim-faced social worker sat in her tiny rental apartment, taking notes as Elena read Goodnight Moon. When Laura cried, "I want to go home, Mommy," Elena had to fight back her own sobs. "We will, baby," she had promised, her voice breaking. "We will." But as she sat in court 2 days later, listening to Sullivan read the unfit mother evaluation, she knew that promise was a lie. She knew Serafina's performance had cost her everything. When Elena came to, the first thing she felt was the cold floor. The second was a profound, crushing shame. "She's conscious," a gruff voice said. A paramedic was kneeling over her. "Elena, can you hear me?" It was Dylan Finch. His face was pale, his tie undone. "You fainted. We're in the anteroom." Elena tried to sit up, but the paramedic gently pushed her back down. "Just stay down for a moment, ma'am. Your blood pressure is all over the place." "What happened?" Elena whispered, the shame burning hot in her throat. "What did the judge say? She called a 30-minute recess?" Dylan said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't place. "Elena, just breathe. The bailiff and I carried you out." She smiled. Elena whispered, tears welling. "Dylan." She smiled as I fell. She won. She saw me faint, and she knew she'd won. "Elena, I need you to listen to me," Dylan said, grabbing her hand. He was vibrating with a new, frantic energy. "I need you to sit up. The paramedic is going to give you some water and a glucose tablet. I need you to get the color back in your face. I need you to walk back into that courtroom." "Why?" Elena sobbed. "So they can terminate my rights. I can't, Dylan. I can't go back in there. I've lost. She's too good." "No," Dylan said, his eyes boring into hers. "She's not good. She's sloppy. And she's arrogant." "What are you talking about? She's flawless." Dylan shook his head, a wild, almost terrifying grin spreading across his face. "She was, until this morning. While Sullivan was doing his victory lap, I got a text. My PI finally cracked it." Elena stared at him, confused. "PI Dylan, you can't afford a PI." "I can't," he agreed. "But my old college roommate Jackson Pierce is one of the best forensic accountants in the state. He owed me. Big time. He's been working this pro bono for 2 weeks, ever since Serafina's testimony about HS Capital and the Van Kriegen estate." And, Dylan said, pulling out his phone, "there is no Van Kriegen estate. There never was. He ran a deep-level search on her. Serafina Hayes is an identity that's only existed for 5 years. He turned the phone screen to Elena. On it was a grainy 5-year-old mugshot from Delaware. The woman had mousy brown hair and a different nose, But the eyes were the same. "Meet Sarah Jenkins," Dillon said. "Wanted in Delaware for defrauding a tech CEO. Wanted in Colorado for a similar scam. She doesn't just have affairs, Elena. She's a professional. She targets self-made tech founders, insinuates herself as a financial expert, creates offshore shell companies, and then over a period of 12-18 months, she bleeds them dry. She was never helping Matthew hide the money from you. She was stealing it from both of you." Elena's mind, sluggish from the faint, struggled to catch up. Stealing? From Matthew too? Yes, he was just the mark. You were just the obstacle. Jackson got a trace on those standard tax haven Cayman accounts. They aren't just holding Petrov Innovations' IP. For the last 6 months, Serafina, or Sarah, has been siphoning millions. Small transfers at first disguised as consulting fees, server maintenance, investment services. But in the last 48 hours after her testimony, she started liquidating. She's been transferring everything. She was planning to flee the country tonight. "My God," Elena whispered. "Jackson found the flight," Dillon said, his voice rising. "A one-way ticket to Zurich booked under the name Sarah Jenkins. He got the flight manifest. He got the bank transfers. He got the whole damn thing. But Matthew authorized her," Elena said. "He gave her signatory power. He gave Serafina Hayes signatory power on the business accounts," Dillon explained, talking faster now. "He thought she was just moving money around to shield it from you in the divorce. He had no idea she was moving it from those accounts into new accounts under her real name. He was her cover. He was so blinded by his own greed and his affair that he made his mistress the sole executor of his own financial ruin." The paramedic finished checking her vitals, looked at Dillon. "Sir, she needs to rest. I should probably take her to the hospital for observation." "No," Elena said, her voice hoarse, but with a new steel in it. She swung her legs over the side of the bench and sat up. The room spun for a second, then settled. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, righteous fury. She had built that company. That money was her daughter's future. And this parasite, was trying to steal it. "Dillon," Elena said, taking the water bottle from him and draining half of it. "Did Jackson send this to the police?" "He sent it to me to the DA's office and to the U.S. Marshals," Dillon said. "The DA has been trying to get an emergency warrant for her arrest, but it's been tied up with a magistrate. They were worried she'd bolt if we made a move." "She's in the courtroom," Elena said, standing up, her legs wobbly, but holding. "She thinks she's won. She's not going anywhere until the judge gives her my daughter." Dillon looked at his watch. "The recess is over in 5 minutes." "Good," Elena said. She splashed cold water on her face from the sink in the corner. She pulled the elastic from her hair, letting it fall to her shoulders. She looked at her reflection. The bruised eyes were still there, but the fear was gone. "What's the plan, Dillon? The DA's investigator is outside. He just arrived. He's going to pass the file to me as we walk in. I'm going to submit it as new evidence. Evidence of criminal fraud and perjury that directly impacts the disposition of the marital assets and the welfare of the child. Will Judge Warren allow it?" "She's a stickler for the truth," Dillon said. "She's not going to let a witness commit perjury in her court and then hand that same witness a child. She won't." Elena took a deep breath. "Okay, let's go." As she pushed the door open to walk back into the courtroom, she felt a strange, cold calm. It wasn't over. She had fainted, and the mistress had smiled. But the third act was just beginning. The walk back into courtroom 3B was the longest of Elena's life. The whispers stopped as she entered. She saw Serafina and Matthew at their table. Serafina leaned over to Sullivan, whispering something, and they both shared a small, smug chuckle. Matthew just looked annoyed, as if Elena's medical emergency was a personal inconvenience, a delay in his day. Elena and Dylan took their seats. Elena placed her hands on the table, forcing them to be still. She met no one's gaze. She just stared at the wooden seal of the state of Texas on the wall behind the judge's bench. "All rise." Judge Warren swept back in. She looked tired, and her gaze on Elena was sharp. "Ms. Petrov, are you medically fit to continue?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elena said. Her voice was clear. It didn't tremble. Across the aisle, Serafina's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She had expected tears, hysterics. She had not expected this cold, quiet composure. "Very well," the judge said. "Mr. Sullivan, you had concluded your motion. Mr. Finch, do you have a response before I rule?" "I do, Your Honor," Dylan said, standing. He held a thin manila folder. It had been passed to him by a man in a rumpled suit who had been waiting outside the door. "Your Honor," Dylan said, "in the last 30 minutes we have received new material evidence. Evidence that this entire proceeding is predicated on a campaign of pathological fraud and perjury." Sullivan was on his feet instantly. "Objection, grandstanding. This is a desperate last-ditch stunt. Whatever evidence he has is inadmissible. The discovery period is closed." "Ordinarily, I would agree, Mr. Sullivan," Judge Warren said, her eyes narrowing. "But pathological fraud is a very strong allegation, Mr. Finch. This had better not be a waste of the court's time." "It is not, Your Honor," Dylan said. He placed the folder on the bailiff's desk. "This evidence proves that the witness, Ms. Serafina Hayes, has perjured herself multiple times. It proves she is currently at this moment in the process of liquidating 100% of Petrov Innovations' assets into foreign accounts under a stolen identity. It proves she is, in fact, a fugitive from justice named Sarah Jenkins." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Elena watched them. Matthew went rigid, his head snapping to look at Dylan. He looked confused, not angry. "Serafina." She went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Her smile was gone, frozen in place. She looked like a marble statue. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have a response to that?" Sullivan scoffed, but his bravado was faltering. "Your Honor, it's absurd, Sarah Jenkins. Stolen identity. This is the very paranoia Dr. Finch's evaluation warned about. Mr. Finch is maligning a respected financial professional." Serafina leaned forward and whispered furiously in Sullivan's ear. He nodded, his confidence returning. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Hayes, informs me this is a ridiculous slander. She is who she says she is. She has never heard of a Sarah Jenkins. This is a pathetic, desperate attempt to smear her reputation." "Then she will have no objection," Dylan countered smoothly to the judge examining the evidence, while Judge Warren held out her hand. "Bailiff, give me the file." She opened it. The courtroom watched as the judge, a woman famous for her impartiality, read. They couldn't see the documents, but they could see her face. Her eyebrows climbed her forehead. She put on her reading glasses, leaning closer. Her lips pressed into a thin white line. She read for 3 full minutes. When she was done, she carefully squared the papers and placed them on her desk. She did not look at Dylan. She did not look at Elena. She looked directly at Serafina Hayes. "Ms. Hayes," the judge said, her voice like cracking ice. "A moment ago, you informed your counsel that you have never heard the name Sarah Jenkins. Is that correct?" Serafina stood up. Her voice was tight, but she was still playing the part. "Yes, Your Honor. I have no idea who that is. This is insane." "Then can you explain this?" The judge held up a piece of paper. It was the flight manifest. "This is a one-way ticket for Swiss Air Flight 88, Departing Austin Bergstrom tonight at 9:15 p.m., destination Zurich. It was booked 3 days ago. The name on the ticket is Sarah Jenkins. The credit card used to book it, however, is an American Express issued to Serafina Hayes. The blood drained from Serafina's face. She was no longer a statue. She was a cornered animal. I don't know, she stammered. That's not possible. My card must have been stolen. Stolen, the judge repeated. Then perhaps you can explain these. She held up another sheaf of papers. These are wire transfer authorizations from the Petrov Innovations Cayman Holding account. Over the last 48 hours, they document the movement of, let's see, $94 million. $94 million transferred to a numbered Swiss account, an account that, according to the U.S. Marshals who are also investigating you, Ms. Hayes, is controlled by one Sarah Jenkins. Matthew Petrov made a sound, a choked-off gasp. 94. He grabbed his own lawyer's arm. Rick, what is she talking about? The Cayman account was just for the IP. It only had 10 million. You told me it was just tax optimization, Sullivan sputtered, looking at Serafina, the blood draining from his own face as he realized his client had lied to him, had made him an unwitting accomplice to the fraud. Silence, Judge Warren barked. Her gavel slammed down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Ms. Hayes, the judge continued, her voice lethal. These wire transfers required a two-step authentication, a password and a digital signature key. According to Mr. Petrov's reaction, he clearly didn't authorize them. But you did, as sole signatory. You used your digital key, which I am willing to bet is currently on your laptop, in that designer bag right next to you. Serafina's eyes darted to her bag. It was a fatal, telling glance. I was protecting the assets. Serafina tried, her voice rising to a shrill panic. From Elena. She was trying to seize them. I was moving them for safekeeping. Matthew knew. He knew. Did you, Mr. Petrov, the judge asked, her gaze slicing into him. Did you know that your associate was transferring $94 million of your company's money into a Swiss bank account under a false name? Matthew Petrov looked like he had been struck by lightning. He looked from the judge to Serafina, his mind finally putting the pieces together. The love, the support, the us against the world narrative, it was all a lie. He wasn't her partner. He was her mark. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, she said, Serafina, you told me it was just... You told me. You idiot! Serafina shrieked, her mask of cool sophistication completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a common thief. You deserved it, both of you. You with your ego and her, she spat, pointing at Elena, with her nothingness. I built that, I saved it. It was my money. That, Judge Warren said, is a confession, and it is perjury. She looked to the bailiff, then to the two plainclothes officers who had silently entered the back of the courtroom. Elena watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was barely breathing. Serafina saw the officers. Her panic turned to animal terror. She grabbed her laptop bag and made a break for the side door. Bailiff, stop her, the judge commanded. The bailiff, a large, heavy-set man, moved with surprising speed, blocking her path. She tried to double back, but the two officers were already there. One of them, a woman, took Serafina's arm in a firm, no-nonsense grip. Let go of me, Serafina screamed. You can't do this. I have rights. Judge Warren stood up, her full height, radiating an authority that dwarfed everyone in the room. The courtroom was dead silent. Elena looked at Serafina, who was now pinned, her crimson dress twisted, her perfect hair a mess. Then the judge spoke the words. Serafina Hayes, also known as Sarah Jenkins. Judge Warren declared, her voice ringing with the cold, clear finality of absolute justice. You are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts of perjury in my courtroom. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound Elena had ever heard. Serafina didn't just get arrested. She imploded. The moment the cold steel touched her wrist, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a torrent of vitriolic rage. You'll regret this, she screamed, her head twisting, her eyes finding Matthew. You weak, pathetic fool, I did everything I made you, and you… Her gaze shifted to Elena. You think you've won. He'll never love you. He's empty. You've won an empty, broken man. Ms. Hayes, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it, the arresting officer said, pulling her firmly toward the exit. He'll be bankrupt by morning, she shrieked, a last parting shot. I already liquidated everything. You're both broke. I still win. I win. And then she was gone, dragged out the side door, her screams echoing down the marble hallway until they were finally cut off by a heavy door closing. The courtroom was left in a state of stunned, reverberating shock. Richard Sullivan, Matthew's lawyer, had collapsed into his chair. His face was ashen. His career, built on representing the rich and powerful, was now linked to a high-profile, catastrophic fraud. He was looking at his client, Matthew, with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Matthew Petrov was completely broken. He was staring at the door where Serafina had disappeared. He wasn't just a man who had been conned. He was a man who had just watched his entire self-image shatter. He had sacrificed his wife, his family, and his integrity for a woman who had been robbing him blind. He had been the Oracle of Austin, the visionary, the genius, and he had been played for a fool by a common con artist. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in silent, racking sobs. Finally, Judge Warren sat down. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, letting the silence stretch. Elena and Dylan just sat waiting. After a long minute, Judge Warren put her glasses back on. Her gaze was soft now, and it rested on Elena. Ms. Petrov, she said, her voice gentle. You have been through an ordeal that this court, that I deeply regret. It seems you were the only person in this entire equation telling the truth. The system failed to see it. Elena just nodded, tears welling in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of a vast, aching relief. Mr. Petrov, the judge said, her voice hardening again. Matthew looked up, his face puffy and red. He looked 10 years older. Sir, the judge said, you are in all likelihood the victim of a massive criminal fraud. But you are also the author of your own misfortune. Your breathtaking arrogance and greed led you to attempt to defraud your wife, your partner of 15 years, and the mother of your child. You conspired to strip her of her assets, her reputation, and her daughter. In doing so, you handed the keys to your entire kingdom to a predator. You are, in short, a fool, and a negligent one at that. Matthew flinched at every word. The district attorney's office, the judge continued, will be working with federal authorities to try and claw back the assets Ms. Hayes or Jenkins has stolen. Given that they are in a numbered Swiss account, I would not be optimistic. Petrov Innovations, as you know it, is likely insolvent. So, Matthew whispered. I have nothing. You have less than nothing, Mr. Petrov, Judge Warren said. You have your name, which is now toxic, and you have the consequences of your actions. She looked down at the file. Given this revelation, all previous motions and testimony are rendered moot. The psychological evaluation of Dr. Alistair Finch, she said, picking up the document with her fingertips as if it were contaminated, will be forwarded to the State Medical Board for immediate review. I suspect his license will be revoked by the end of the month. She looked at Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, your conduct in this case has been at best willfully ignorant. You'd be wise to retain your own counsel. Finally, she looked back to Elena and Dylan. Mr. Finch, you have done exemplary work. You are a credit to your profession. Dylan, stunned, just said, "Thank you, Your Honor." "Now," the judge said, "we are still in a divorce proceeding, and there is the matter of a child. All assets of the Petrov marriage are hereby frozen pending the outcome of the federal fraud investigation. Whatever is recovered, if anything, will be placed in a trust, and Ms. Petrov will be the sole administrator." She took a breath. "As to the custody of Laura Petrov, Mr. Petrov, you have demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment. You have willingly and knowingly engaged in an extramarital affair, conspired to commit fraud against your spouse, and most damningly, you brought a dangerous fugitive criminal into your home and into your daughter's life. You are by any definition an unfit parent." Matthew's head snapped up. "No, please. She's my daughter. I love her. Your love did not stop you from trying to terminate her mother's rights based on fabricated evidence." Judge Warren said, her voice like iron. "You do not get to use your child as a shield now. Effective immediately, Elena Petrov is granted sole legal and physical custody of Laura Petrov. Mr. Petrov's visitations will be supervised for 2 hours, twice a month, at a state-run facility, pending a new psychological evaluation, one that I will order." She lifted her gavel. "This divorce is granted. All motions from the respondent are affirmed. All motions from the petitioner are denied. This case is closed. We are adjourned." The gavel slammed down. It was over. Elena didn't move for a full minute. She just sat listening to the sounds of the courtroom emptying. She heard Richard Sullivan telling Matthew, "We'll appeal," and she heard Matthew's dead, hollow reply. "With what?" Dylan Finch put his hand on her shoulder. "Elena, it's over. You won." Elena turned to him, and the composure she had held for the last hour finally broke. She didn't sob. She just let the tears stream down her face, a silent, steady flow of 6 months of terror, pain, and exhaustion. "You saved my life, Dylan," she whispered. "You saved my daughter's life." "You saved your own," Dylan said, his own eyes wet. "You never gave up. Now let's get you out of here. Someone is waiting for you." He helped her up. Her legs were still shaky, but this time it was from relief. They walked out of the courtroom past the clusters of stunned reporters who were already shouting into their phones about the arrest of the millionaire Mistress. They walked past Matthew, who was sitting alone at his table, a multi-billionaire on paper who couldn't afford a cup of coffee. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of the life he had set on fire. Elena looked at him not with hatred or even pity. She just looked. And then she walked on. She didn't feel like a victor. She didn't feel joy. She felt quiet. She felt like a survivor who had just washed up on shore after a shipwreck. Dylan walked her down the long marble hallway and out the massive front doors of the courthouse. The Texas sun was bright, and it made her wince. And then she saw her, Standing at the bottom of the steps next to Dylan's beat-up sedan was her daughter. Dylan must have arranged for the social worker to bring her anticipating a good outcome, though surely not this. Laura, her dark hair in pigtails, saw her. Her face, which had been anxious and small, exploded with light. "Mommy!" She broke free from the social worker and sprinted up the steps. Elena stumbled down to meet her, dropping to her knees on the hard stone. Laura slammed into her chest, her small arms wrapping around Elena's neck so tightly it hurt. "Mommy, mommy, mommy," Laura chanted, burying her face in Elena's hair. Elena hugged her back, her face pressed against her daughter's scalp, inhaling the scent of her, the scent of grape shampoo and childhood. She held her, rocking her, her body shaking. "I've got you," Elena whispered, her voice thick. "I've got you. It's over. We're safe. We're going home." She looked up at Dylan, who was smiling, his face a map of pure exhaustion and pride. She had no money. She had no company. Her name was all over the news, tied to a scandal that would be talked about for years. She was starting from absolute zero. But as she held her daughter in her arms, feeling the frantic, happy beat of Laura's heart against her own, Elena Petrov knew she hadn't lost anything of value. She had fainted. The mistress had smiled. The judge had delivered justice. And Elena had survived. She had her daughter. She had her name. And for the first time in a very long time, she was free. The gavel falls, but the story doesn't end there. Elena and Laura had to rebuild their lives from nothing, armed only with their resilience and the truth. Matthew Petrov faced years of lawsuits, and Serafina Hayes, or Sarah Jenkins, was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. This story is a brutal reminder that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and that arrogance is always a prelude to a fall. It shows that even when you're pushed to the brink, even when you collapse under the weight of injustice, there is always hope. Sometimes the person who seems to have all the power is just the one with the most to lose. If you were gripped by Elena's fight for justice, please hit that like button. What part of the judge's ruling was the most satisfying? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more true-life stories of drama betrayal and ultimate vindication, make sure to share this video and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.